Good afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome to this IIEA webinar on the subject of Can Europe act strategically to a changed geopolitical reality? My name is Barry Colfer, and I'm the Director of Research here, calling in from sunny Dublin. We're joined by Judy Dempsey, who's non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie Europe, and someone who I know is very familiar to many of our members and many of you here on the call. A very warm welcome back to the Institute, Judy, albeit remotely.
Thank you, Ben.
Europe, you're very welcome. Europe and Europeans find ourselves in a really new geopolitical reality while Russia continues its war of aggression against Ukraine and threatens to advance on Europe. And amid the structural changes been wrought before our eyes by the evolving situation in the US vis-a-vis the incipient trade war being waged by Donald Trump. 1 week on, I'm pretty sure today, to the day from what he dubbed Liberation Day, it's an understatement to say that the transatlantic relationship is undergoing a period of change. Meanwhile, the likes of China is emerging as a status quo power vis-a-vis the rules-based system, which feels like a real gear shift in the global trading system. One could add to this the likes of climate change, the rise of big tech and AI, and demographic shifts, and come to the same conclusion that major questions are being asked about Europe's capacity to defend itself, to protect the European way of life, and indeed to act strategically. The recent white paper on defence published last month is one example of how thinking at the level of the EU is evolving and evolving fast. In her remarks, Judy Dempsey will discuss some of the challenges that Europe faces in this new geopolitical moment and will consider whether the EU can adapt adequately to meet this new reality. Before handing over to you, Judy, I will briefly introduce you and just mention a couple of words of housekeeping. So Judy Dempsey, as mentioned, is non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie Europe, one of the world's leading foreign and security policy think tanks. Judy was previously the editor-in-chief of the excellent Strategic Europe blog from 2012 to 2024, and is the author of the book The Merkel Phenomenon with Korber Stiftung 2013. To mention only a few of the places where Judy has worked, this includes for the International Herald Tribune as the paper's Germany and East European correspondent, for the Financial Times as the diplomatic correspondent in Brussels, as Jerusalem bureau chief, Berlin correspondent, and Central Eastern European correspondent. Judy is also reported for the likes of the Irish Times and the Economist, which I think collectively, Judy, covers a huge proportion of the sorts of things that your audience here reads on the daily. So thanks for your contribution, your enormous contribution over these years. Judy is going to speak for about 12 or 15 minutes as usual before we'll move to the questions and answers, which I'll moderate. I should just remember myself and to the audience and to Judy, this meeting is on the record. Participants, you can ask your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom, as is the convention. And I think that's it. So again, with a real sincere welcome and thanks for your time, Judy, over to you.
Oh gosh, thank you, Barry, for this very warm welcome, and thank you for your great staff to organize this. I was going to thank you for this title, but it's one of the most intimidating titles I've been presented with for such a long time because of the timing, but also because of the complexity. In any case, I'm going to set out a few things, and I'm not going to pull any punches. And once again, thank you for having me. I always like the IIEA setup. So, the title is Can Europe Act Strategically in a Changed Geopolitical Reality? And I will make a decisive answer towards the end, but as opening remarks, this is a serious, it's not even a blip, this is a serious change, not even in the transatlantic relationship, but in the entire global world order. President Trump, in his first administration, at least had competent people with an institutional memory and an Atlanticist memory and a memory of multilateral institutions. This has actually gone by the wayside in the second administration. And it seems to me that Trump now has kind of taken his revenge on the global world order, taken his revenge on Europe, but taken it's not even revenge. He has disregarded the post-1945 multilateral institutions. And this is very, very important, whether it's NATO, whether it's United Nations, whether it's the World Trade Organization, whether it's other international organizations. For President Trump, bilateralism is the key. And it's just not this MAGA thing, make America great again. It's a philosophical bilateralism which disregards any kind of relationships that don't return any kind of transactional profit for America. This is the first thing, and this is really a fundamental change. And the America of the 1930s actually propelled America after 1945 to realize how multilateralism is a very, very good thing for stability, for predictability, for confidence, and for prosperity, however much this is shared or not shared. So this is the first thing I just want to set out, that the post-1945 era under this administration is really ebbing away so quickly. So, what does this mean for Europe? Well, I have to say from the outset that the European Union, as 27 member states, and we can discuss Britain later, I hope, in the Q&A, Europe has never acted strategically. And strategically means to look forward, to look at the past, to see how you can prepare not only for the present, but for the future. And strategy and strategic culture means having the experience. There's only a couple of countries have this. France, because of its nuclear power, Great Britain as well. Germany doesn't have a strategic culture. It may be the biggest economy in the European Union. It is the biggest economy, but politically, it doesn't have a strategic culture. Maybe it's just the legacy of the Second World War. But the point about a strategic culture in Europe means that if you are to have one, you must have a shared threat perception. And at the moment, the European Union, the 27 member states, they're still divided. They don't have a common threat perception. Now, you may all say, this is crazy. Of course we do. No, we don't. The Northern Europeans have the threat perception of Russia and what is this doing in Ukraine. The Southern Europeans, Portugal, Spain, Greece, they have other different threat perceptions. It's migration. France has a threat perception. They have had a huge problem with the Sahel in Africa, and they've withdrawn from there. But their problem is combined with terrorism. But now it's Russia, because actually President Macron sees exactly the threat that Russia is posing to Europe. But there still isn't this really tight common threat perception. And if that isn't there, there cannot be a kind of strategic culture. And I'm very surprised that even after the Russian invasion of 2014, not to mention what it did in Georgia 2007, and now, of course, in Ukraine 2022, that it still hasn't meshed into a strong strategic culture, which should be based on intelligence sharing, security, defense in all its ramifications. At the moment, national states still prevail, despite the attempts, and they've been not bad in terms of unity with Russia, or vis-a-vis Russia. And this is the first thing. The second element is that for a strategic culture, you have to know what tools you're going to use. And actually, this is what is interesting. While Putin actually didn't create the kind of strategic culture or unity, which he should have done with his invasion of Ukraine or what he's doing in Belarus and Georgia and Armenia and other countries, the interesting thing is that President Trump is actually fostering a kind of unity. It's a bit woolly, but unity at the moment because of his tariffs. His tariffs affect every single country. And while Prime Minister Viktor Orban thinks that Hungary is a special relationship with the United States, you should see what the United States says about the tariffs on Hungary. It's scathing on Hungary's aspects of procurement, on transparency, on the rule of law. It's very, very interesting. So everybody is actually brought under this huge umbrella of suffering under the tariffs. So this is very, very bad news for the Europeans. It's very, very bad news for the Eurozone. It's very, very bad news for economies, for employment, for consumer spending, for investment, for confidence. Confidence is the key to investment and what industry chiefs actually think about this. Can Europe respond? Yes. This is a chance for Europe to be strategic. How? Well, of course, President Trump wants to have member states going and bowing to him. Oh, please, President Trump, please reduce my tariffs or no tariffs at all. This is not the way to deal with them. Of course, he wants this. Begging to the United States is so humiliating, frankly. Actually, this is a great chance for the European Union. One is that the Commission has the prerogative over trade. And secondly, just take a look around us. Let's ratify the whole trade agreement with Canada. Let's reach out to Singapore, to New Zealand, to Australia, to Vietnam, to South Africa, to the African countries, and to so many other countries, and forge very quick trade agreements. They don't have to be cobbled together. I mean, they can be quite focused and everything. But this is the chance for the European Union to embrace so many other countries now. And remember, all of these countries, whether it's Botswana, Lesotho, Madagascar. I mean, they've been penalized over the vanilla. They are the key exports of vanilla. But, President Trump says, oh, well, because they're exporting so much, we slap on them. This is our chance to actually forge imaginative and creative trade agreements with these countries and bring them into a bigger ring of the European Union and a wider ring that will actually be able to at least try to stabilize their economies, but we've got to do it quickly. You could call it a coalition of the willing. I would go much further. This is a chance for Europe, which the EU always presents itself as the great trade and economic area. Go for it now. We have a problem with this, the member states. And of course, we have the member states balking and opposing the deal, which has been going on for at least 25 years, a kind of draft agreement with the Mercosur, the Latin American countries. But they're desperate to have this agreement now with the EU. And the EU countries should do this. And France has held it up for agricultural reasons. So if other countries and so many other member states hide behind France or Germany or other countries. But now is the time to be magnanimous, pragmatic, and creative and say, let's bring them in and do these deals. Yes, farmers will be very upset in some of these countries and so on, but we've got to look at the bigger picture and realize that the Trump administration is there for another 3.5 years. And heaven knows if he's going to try to change the constitution to have another third term. But let's not speculate on this. We've got to deal with what we have now instead of waiting for the future. Because what is happening now is what Trump has always wanted to institutionalize, a unilateral United States that can stand alone. And the European Union should actually stand back and say, well, this is what we can do, and open the door to these kind of trade relations. I think this would be an enormous strategic element in the European Union's outlook. That's the second element of strategy. The third one is, I'm not so sure that some of my Irish viewers might buy into this, but we have to think seriously about security and defence and neutrality. Ireland, the old days are over. I mean, you can have your cables under the water, but Russia and China is going to disrupt your cables, your whole high-tech cables under the water. Secondly, Trump is penalizing you, your poor Taoiseach. God, did he get a dressing down? If you thought Zelensky got a dressing down, well, your Taoiseach got a dressing down as well when he was in the White House. These days are over. There's no preferential standards or sort of favorites anymore in the European Union. And this is very important that Ireland and other countries should remember inside the EU, that President Trump and this administration does not like the European Union because of its trade, because of its profile, because of its values, because of what it stands for, and actually because of what it represents. It is quite liked by so many other countries. Now, just bring me back to Ireland, because I think it's important that Ireland will have to, sooner rather than later, like Austria, have a discussion about neutrality, because this feeds into the whole element of the NATO alliance and what's going to happen to it. There's still an institutional memory, and it goes back a long way inside the Pentagon and the State Department, but there's no doubt there's a huge animosity by the administration in the White House about NATO. It's all about money, 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 spend, spend, spend. But whether or not NATO is spending, and they are spending, but we have to spend wisely, we have to think in a kind of different strategic element of what alliances mean, what NATO means, and what neutral countries can contribute. So this is my take on it. Given President Trump's ambiguity is not the right word towards Ukraine, and non-ambiguity towards Putin, the European Union with NATO have to decide how they're going to continue protecting Ukraine politically, financially, economically, security, and with intelligence. And this is going to require an awful lot of political will by all the member states. And this includes neutral countries and big countries, small countries, and of course the Nordics. There's going to be no European army in Ukraine. This is not going to happen. And there won't be agreement on this. However, and maybe President Macron may be right, but it's always open to interpretation. But maybe there should be coalitions of the willing. Maybe there should be kind of coalitions of the willing, in the sense that if you don't want to spend money on defending Ukraine, or send in troops, I use the word carefully, for training, or bring over the Ukrainians into European countries for training or whatever, but have some kind of coalitions of the willing. And the Nordic countries want to do this. Remember, Finland and Sweden, both members of the European Union, they are now in NATO. And maybe you could have much closer cooperation between NATO and the EU to help actually Ukraine enter the negotiations on a much stronger footing. It's very, very difficult. And I think there is a certain realization in Berlin, in France, in Poland, in the Netherlands, in Finland, in Sweden, and in Great Britain particularly, which we mustn't forget about, that actually what President Trump is doing with President Putin is actually destabilizing Europe. And it's creating a cordon sanitaire. And it's as if President Trump is using Ukraine as another barrier, or a kind of new Berlin Wall between Europeans and Russia, make Ukraine actually the buffer zone. Excuse me, this is 2025. And Ukraine is fighting for its territorial integrity, for its sovereignty, for its independence, and this should be defended. The Europeans know they can only go so far, but coalitions of the willing in terms of defense, in terms of political support, and in terms of maybe compensating, to be very difficult to compensate for the American absence of support for Ukraine. This is possible. There's a practical implication as well. There is something called the Ramstein Forum, and I think maybe some of you know this. This is known as the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. It was established in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine. It consists of 53 or 54 countries, ranging from Japan, Korea, worldwide. And the Americans have led this forum. Ramstein is the big army base in Germany. And now, for the first time ever, the new Pentagon chief, he didn't attend this forum, which was held in Brussels 10 days ago. He wanted to do it by Zoom or something. And I was been speaking to my NATO colleagues and my other colleagues and say, well, let the Europeans take over Ramstein. I mean, they're spending so much money on trying to bolster the Ukraine economy. And if the Americans, especially Trump, is going to say, oh, the Europeans won't pick up the tab, or they don't take the leadership, let the Europeans, the European element, the caucus, I call it, NATO, take it over, run it. There's no reason why they can't do it. They are skilled enough, they have enough experience, and they can do it. this could be a good burden sharing, but it could show actually that the Europeans could take that kind of element in defense and security much more strongly. And the other final issue is the bigger issue of foreign policy. European foreign policy is a mess. We have no traction in the Middle East. We are divided over Israel. We are divided over Palestine. We are divided over how to deal with NGOs or civil society in Egypt. We are divided over Iran. And maybe I should be just quite pragmatic and say, if we can't do the Middle East, stop fumbling around. But we have to decide actually what our priorities are with regard to Palestine and Israel. But given what is happening in the Middle East, it is quite extraordinary that there cannot be a united stance by Europe, biggest donor to Palestine, a big supporter technologically and otherwise with Israel, a huge contributor to the NGOs in Israel, in Egypt and the other Middle East countries. The fact that we still cannot get a coherent Middle East policy, it's no point in saying it's a pity or it's shameless, but the point is we have to know what our limits are. Which brings me to my last point, that strategy recognizes or must recognize what limitations are, what the limits are, what you can do and what you can't do, when you have the tools or you don't. It's not about hopes, it's not about optimism, it's not about ambitions, it's about concrete ways of dealing with the problems. And I feel now that given what's happening in the White House, that the problems the EU is facing are here in the European Union and with our neighbours. And we've got to use these we have enormous powers and influence and still money to actually embrace strategy in a much more creative way. I've touched on this with the coalitions on the trade issues, coalitions with defence, and now we have to take a hard look at ourselves and don't waste time and realise we've got to act now. And that means convincing the member states that integration is a key factor. I didn't mention this. Nobody mentions this. It's as if it's taboo. But integration is Europe's future, not being beholden to the member states. It's got to be political integration, security integration, and much more economic integration. And these are not yet put on the agenda. Whether the new German government will do this, I have no idea. Thank you very much.